My kids left me to starve in a garage while using my money to live in luxury until I showed up and took my life back publicly. The Vermont winter had laid its thick blanket of white over everything, transforming the landscape into a pristine canvas. Christmas Eve was approaching, and as I trudged up the winding driveway toward Maddie's hilltop mansion, I could hear faint laughter and jazz music spilling from inside. The windows glowed with warmth, golden light cutting through the darkness, illuminating snowflakes as they drifted down around me. Holiday decorations adorned every corner of the property, expensive, tasteful arrangements that seemed to mock the simplicity of the small hand-wrapped package I clutched. My name is Helen Parker. I'm 63 years old, dressed in my best outfit, which isn't saying much. A worn wool coat I've had for a decade, sensible shoes caked with snow, and a knitted scarf that's seen better days. My hands trembled partly from the biting cold, but mostly from fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of seeing the look in my daughter's eyes when she opened the door and found me standing there uninvited. For the past 18 months, I've been living in a tiny converted attic above Mrs. Collins's garage. She's an old friend who took pity on me after I ran out of places to go. My own children, the ones I raised, educated, and sacrificed everything for, had no room for me in their lives anymore. Not physically, not emotionally. Tonight, I came without warning, carrying a Christmas gift I'd spent 2 months creating a photo album filled with family memories spanning decades. Each picture carefully annotated in purple ink. I'd written little stories beside each photo, reminders of who we were, who we had been together. I hoped that somehow, if only for a moment, I might still hold a place in their hearts. 3 years ago, after my husband Robert died, I sold our only house, the one we'd paid off over 30 years of hard work. I divided the money equally between my 3 children, Ben, my oldest, who dreamed of opening a restaurant and now ran the successful savory chain; Madeline, who everyone calls Maddie, who founded a high-end fashion boutique and now lived in this mansion; and Clara, my youngest, a graphic design prodigy who owned a thriving marketing agency. When I handed them their shares, they embraced me with tears in their eyes. Maddie promised, "Mom, you'll live like a queen now." Ben assured me, "There's always room for you at our place." Clara kissed my hand and whispered, "Your sacrifice is what drives me to succeed." Beautiful words. Empty promises. I lived with each of them in turn. First Ben, until his wife suggested I might prefer my own space. Then Maddie, until she explained they needed the guest room for networking opportunities. Finally, Clara, who after 3 months gently suggested I find somewhere more suited to my lifestyle. Gradually, my calls went unanswered because they were in meetings. My texts were seen but never replied to. Holiday invitations were met with, "We're taking a private break this year." Recently, when I suggested a simple dinner together, Maddie informed me her schedule was booked through the month. Standing before the towering wooden door, I felt impossibly small. Inside, glasses clinked, sophisticated conversation flowed. People laughed with abandonment, all serving to highlight how out of place I was. I felt like a stranger attempting to enter a world that once belonged to me, but no longer did. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the doorbell, considering turning back to my cold attic room. But my trembling hands tightened around the gift. 2 months of work, of memories carefully preserved. I took a deep breath and reminded myself, I'm their mother. I shouldn't need an invitation to exist in their lives. When I finally pressed the doorbell, 20 agonizing seconds passed before the door swung open. There stood Maddie, sleek, polished, her face expertly made up, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. The moment she recognized me, her practiced smile vanished. "Mom, what? Why didn't you call first?" I held up my small package, trying to keep my voice steady. "I brought you a Christmas gift. I just wanted to stop by briefly." Maddie stepped outside, quickly pulling the door closed behind her, glancing over her shoulder, as if afraid someone might see me. She whispered, "Mom, this really isn't a good time. We have investors here." "Are Ben and Clara inside too?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She hesitated. "Yes, but they're busy networking. You shouldn't just show up like this." My feet felt numb, not from the snow soaking through my worn shoes, but from the sensation of being erased from the life I'd created. I didn't feel anger, just a sharp, slow, deep ache in my chest, like a wound opening wider with each passing second. "I'll call you next week when I'm free," Maddie added. "We can have lunch, I promise." I knew she wouldn't call. She hadn't called in 3 months. As I began to turn away, the house lights brightened momentarily as someone opened an interior door. Through the large bay window, I caught a glimpse inside Ben, raising a champagne flute with men in expensive suits, and Clara laughing by the buffet table, radiant in a red dress. None of them knew I was standing just feet away, frozen in the snow, clutching a handmade gift and swallowing back tears. In that moment, I made a decision that my 3 children would never forget. Without another moment of hesitation, I pushed past Maddie and walked straight into the house. This place where I had once hosted guests, prepared meals, and built from my sweat and tears, I no longer needed permission to enter a world I helped create. The effect was immediate. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Champagne flutes froze in midair. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward me. This plainly dressed older woman, who had suddenly materialized in their midst like an apparition. I walked slowly, deliberately, still holding my gift, and positioned myself beneath the crystal chandelier. I stood among strangers in designer clothing, their faces a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Maddie rushed after me, panic evident in her eyes as she grabbed my arm. "Mom, what are you doing?" Her voice was a harsh whisper meant only for me, but audible in the sudden silence. With a calmness I didn't know I possessed, I gently placed my gift on a side table next to the champagne tower. I removed my old coat, folded it neatly over my arm, and addressed the room in a clear, steady voice. "Merry Christmas, everyone. I'm Helen Parker, mother of Maddie, Ben, and Clara. It's lovely to meet you all." No one spoke. The guests looked at me, then at my children, waiting for some explanation, some reaction that would make sense of this unexpected intrusion. From across the room, a silver-haired man in an ash-gray suit stepped forward. His eyes widened with recognition, a look of genuine pleasure spreading across his distinguished face. "Helen Parker," he asked, approaching me. "Didn't you teach English at Springford High about 20 years ago?" I nodded, confused at being recognized. "Yes, that's me." His face broke into a broad smile, eyes glistening. "You helped my son Brian pass his final exams in 2001. He's an award-winning author now. He credits you with changing his life." The room filled with murmurs. Someone at a corner table whispered loudly enough for all to hear. "That's Helen Parker. I read her article in Teachers Quarterly last year." The silver-haired man introduced himself as Stephen Blackwood, CEO of a financial firm. He turned to me again, his tone becoming more serious. "We've been trying to contact you for 3 months about the Springford Legacy Award, which includes a $50,000 grant. But your family informed us you had relocated to France permanently and didn't wish to be disturbed." I stood frozen, the words hitting me like a physical blow. "I've never left the country." My eyes found Maddie. She turned away, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on the wall. I looked at Ben, who was busying himself pouring another drink, avoiding my gaze entirely. Clara was adjusting a tablecloth, her hands trembling slightly, her shoulders hunched. In that moment, puzzle pieces from the past months clicked into place. Strange calls Maddie had dismissed as spam, don't answer. Letters Ben had offered to screen for me. Emails Clara promised to forward from the school that never arrived. Stephen looked perplexed. I don't understand why this information wasn't passed along to you. At the awards ceremony, when I asked, your family said they couldn't provide contact information because you were away indefinitely. I turned slowly to face my daughter, the reality of what had happened becoming clearer with each passing second. The room around us seemed to fade away as I stared into Maddie's eyes, searching for any trace of the daughter I raised. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't about forgotten calls or overlooked invitations. This wasn't about being too busy or needing space. This was deliberate, calculated. A systematic effort to erase me from their lives while using my name when convenient. The only question that remained was, why? Perhaps. Stephen continued oblivious to the family drama unfolding before him. There was some miscommunication. The committee was quite surprised when no one collected the award on your behalf. There was no miscommunication, I said softly, my eyes never leaving Maddie's face. There was only deception. Ben finally approached, attempting damage control. Mom, this isn't the place to discuss family matters. Let's talk privately. No, I replied loud enough for the room to hear. I think we've had quite enough privacy. Too much, in fact. Clara began to cry, silently, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. The guests shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware they were witnessing something deeply personal and painful. Some pretended to be engrossed in their drinks. Others watched unabashedly, sensing scandal. Mrs. Parker, Stephen said gently, if you'd like, we can still present the award. The funds are being held in trust. In trust. I repeated the phrase, striking me as darkly ironic. Yes, trust is exactly what's at issue here, isn't it? I turned to address the entire room, my voice stronger than it had been in years. I sold my house 3 years ago to give my children a better start. They promised I would always have a home with them. Instead, I've been living in a garage apartment wondering why my own flesh and blood stopped answering my calls. A woman gasped. Someone muttered, shameful. Mom, please. Maddie begged, her perfect image crumbling before her guests and investors. But I wasn't finished. 3 years of silence was ending tonight. And now I discover they've been intercepting my mail, screening my calls, and telling people I've moved to another continent, all while collecting awards and money in my name. The room had gone completely still. No one moved. No one spoke. I picked up my gift from the table and held it to my chest. I came here tonight to give my children a piece of our shared past. Instead, I've discovered just how far they've gone to erase me from their present. The atmosphere in the room transformed after Stephen Blackwood's revelation. The elegant party, with its polished veneer of success and sophistication, had morphed into something tense and uncomfortable. Every eye in the room focused on my 3 children, Maddie, Ben, and Clara, who suddenly looked much smaller than they had moments before. Isn't she the mother who sold her house to put her kids through college? A guest muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. The whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Maddie Ever, the image-conscious businesswoman, forced a smile and stepped forward. There must be some misunderstanding. She announced, her voice tight despite her attempt at casual dismissal. I maintained my composure, looking directly at my eldest daughter. You told the school I was living in France. I haven't left Vermont in 3 years. Maddie's reply came in a barely audible mumble. I thought they would follow up later. Stephen cut in, his voice carrying the authority of his position. We sent emails, letters, even made phone calls, all without response. So they deliberately blocked communications. A female guest whispered to her companion, not bothering to keep her voice down. More pieces of the puzzle fell into place as I recounted the pattern. Maddie, you told me to get rid of my old SIM card because of too much spam. She flinched. Ben, you said, let us handle your mail, Mom, so you don't have to go out in the cold. He took another long sip of his drink, avoiding eye contact. And Clara, you gave me a shared email address, family, Doylink calm to keep all communications centralized. Clara's face crumpled. She was always the most emotional of my children, the one who had the hardest time maintaining deception. Without warning, she burst into tears in the middle of the crowded room. "I didn't want to hide things from you, Mom," she sobbed. "But Maddie said it wasn't important, and Ben said you couldn't handle the stress anymore." The guests began talking loudly among themselves. I saw expressions of disgust and anger directed at my children. These wealthy investors and community leaders who had come to celebrate and network were instead witnessing a family betrayal unfold before their eyes. I turned to Maddie, my voice steady but firm. "What happened to the $50,000 award money?" Maddie shifted uncomfortably. It's it's still in a joint account for safekeeping, in case you needed it." I pivoted toward Ben. "And your Maldives vacation. 2 weeks before that trip, you told me you couldn't help pay for my dental work because you were financially strapped." Ben's face flushed. "That was a business reward from partners." A woman in a tailored suit whom I hadn't noticed before was scribbling furiously in a small notebook Maddie had introduced her earlier to someone as an economic journalist. The woman looked up from her notes. "So Wallace Design and Savory Restaurants are directly connected to undisclosed private funding sources." I watched as beads of sweat formed on Maddie's forehead. Clara's shoulders slumped further. Ben slammed his hand on the table, his composure completely shattered. "That's enough," he shouted. "This is a private matter." "Is it?" I countered, moving to the center of the room. "I didn't come here to cause a disruption. I came because I'm the mother of these 3 people standing before you, and I have the right to know when my life is being controlled by my own children." An older gentleman in the corner spoke up, his voice resonating with indignation. "And I think you have the right to know how your children have been leveraging your name to attract investment." I glanced around the room, taking in the faces that had been strangers just minutes ago, but now seemed to be allies, successful, powerful people who recognized something fundamentally wrong in what my children had done. Ben attempted to regain control. "This is all being blown out of proportion. Mom has been struggling with memory issues." "Don't you dare!" I interrupted, my voice like steel. "Don't you dare try to discredit me now." Stephen Blackwood stepped forward again. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Parker, your article on educational reform was one of the most lucid and compelling pieces I've read in years. That's hardly the work of someone with cognitive issues." More murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Clara was openly weeping now. "Mom, we just wanted to protect you." "Protect me, or protect yourselves from me?" I asked. "Which one of you took the call about the award ceremony? Which one of you decided I shouldn't know about it?" The silence that followed was deafening. Maddie finally spoke. "We were going to tell you when the time was right." "When would that be?" I asked. "After you'd spent the money. After I was too old or sick to question you. After I was safely tucked away somewhere out of sight." A server who had been frozen in place with a tray of appetizers slowly backed out of the room. Other guests began to edge toward the exit, sensing this was no longer a celebration they wanted to witness. "Your businesses," I continued, addressing all 3 of my children, "have they benefited from my reputation, my connections from 30 years of teaching, my name on grant applications?" Ben's silence was confirmation enough. "I gave you everything," I said, my voice breaking slightly for the first time. "Not just money, my time, my love, my trust, and in return, you erased me from your lives when I became inconvenient." The journalist was still taking notes. Maddie noticed and shot her a panicked look. "Perhaps we should continue this in private." Ben suggested, his voice lower, now attempting to sound reasonable. "No," I said firmly. "I've had enough privacy, enough secrets, enough lies." I looked around the room at the strangers who were no longer strangers, witnesses to this painful unmasking. Many nodded in support, offering small gestures of encouragement, and suddenly I understood something I hadn't before. My children weren't just afraid of me, they were afraid of the truth I carried with me, the reality of who they were beneath the designer clothes and impressive titles, the story of where they came from and what they'd done to get here. It was time to reclaim not just my dignity, but my place in their narrative. Not as a faded photograph to be hidden away, but as the woman who had made their lives possible and who still had a life of her own to live. We should continue this discussion in private. I suggested giving my children one final chance to preserve some dignity. Let's step into another room. Maddie immediately shook her head, her social mask slipping back into place. That's not possible. The guests are waiting. We can talk about this later. A cold smile formed on my lips, one I didn't recognize from my decades of accommodating others. The guests will hear everything because this is no longer a private matter. This is the public consequence of your choices. I turned to address the room, speaking clearly and deliberately, my voice stronger than it had been in years. After I sold our family home, I divided the money equally between my 3 children as I promised I would. Each received their share to pursue their dreams. I gestured around the lavish room. You can see the results. The guests shifted uncomfortably as I continued. I then lived month to month in spare bedrooms, then in attics, then finally out of their homes entirely. Not once did any of my 3 children say, "Mom, please stay." A woman in an emerald dress gasped. "So it's true, I thought she lived with you all this time." She directed her question at Maddie, who had apparently told a different story to her social circle. Ben stepped forward, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Mom's making this sound worse than it is. You know how busy we all are." Clara wiped tears from her face, smearing her expensive makeup. "You don't understand, Mom. There's so much pressure in our lives. If clients saw you living in an attic room, what would they think?" Maddie Ever, the image manager, tried to maintain her composure. "Mom needs peace and quiet. She shouldn't be burdened with financial stress or work pressures." I answered each excuse with brutal honesty. "I work as a substitute teacher for $18 an hour. Each month I choose between buying arthritis medication and turning on the heat." The room grew even quieter. I called Maddie in September. She was at a seminar. Clara promised to visit last weekend. She never came. Ben suggested I cancel my cable subscription to save money while he was planning his 3rd vacation this year. The expressions on the faces of the guests transformed from mere discomfort to outright indignation. These people, colleagues, potential partners, investors, were seeing my children in a new light. A young investor in the corner spoke up, his voice carrying across the room. "I only partner with people who demonstrate clear family values. This isn't just about business, it's about character." Maddie's eyes darted around in panic. Clara buried her face in her hands. Ben pulled out his phone, fingers poised as if ready to call his lawyer. I reached into my coat pocket and removed a business card, holding it up for all to see. "I will be calling Stephen Blackwood tomorrow to accept the position of Director of Community Education at Springford School." My voice was steady, my intention clear. "I will also request a full audit of all grants and awards issued in my name that have been intercepted by my children." The silence that followed was deafening. No one dared speak. Maddie stepped toward me, her voice a desperate whisper. "Mom, you can't do this. What will people think?" I met her gaze evenly. "They're already thinking it, and what they're thinking is the truth." Stephen Blackwood nodded from across the room. "The position is yours, Helen. We've been holding it open." Several other guests murmured their support. The economic journalist was still taking notes, her eyes alight with the unexpected story unfolding before her. Ben attempted one final recovery. "This is all a misunderstanding. Mom's been under a lot of stress lately." "The only stress I've been under," I interrupted, is wondering why my own children, whom I raised with love and sacrifice, decided I was no longer worthy of basic honesty or respect. I bent down to retrieve the gift I had placed on the table earlier. The photo album I'd spent 2 months creating. I held it against my chest like a shield. You three were once the most precious things in my life, I said, looking at each of my children in turn, but from today forward I will be the most precious thing in my own life. The words hung in the air, powerful in their simplicity. It was the first time I'd ever seen Maddie without a counter-argument, the first time Ben couldn't muster his defensive anger, and Clara was no longer crying for herself, but for what she had truly lost, a mother's trust freely given and carelessly discarded. I turned to Stephen. I'd like to discuss the award and position further. Would tomorrow morning be convenient? He nodded, respect evident in his eyes. My office at 9. We have much to discuss. As I moved toward the door, guests parted to let me through, several reaching out to touch my arm. In silent support, I had arrived as an unwelcome intruder, but was leaving as someone worthy of their respect. At the door, I paused and turned back one last time. My children stood frozen, their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. For what it's worth, I said softly, I brought this album to remind you of who we once were as a family. Perhaps someday, when you're ready to be honest about who you've become, we can talk about who we might be in the future. With that, I stepped out into the cold night air. The snow was still falling, but I no longer felt the chill. Something long dormant had awakened inside me, a fire of self-worth that would never again be extinguished. Behind me, through the closing door, I heard the distinct sound of Clara's broken sob and Ben's angry curse. But for the first time in years, their reactions weren't my responsibility to fix. My only responsibility now was to myself. The room fell into an uneasy quiet after my declaration about accepting the new position and auditing the intercepted funds. The guests watched, captivated by the unfolding drama. My children stood frozen, their faces pale with shock at how quickly their perfect evening had collapsed. But I wasn't finished. I reached into my handbag and withdrew a thin envelope. With deliberate slowness, I removed the legal document inside the deed to our old family home that I had sold 3 years ago. I've repurchased our old house, I announced to the entire room, with financial assistance from Mrs. Collins, the woman who rented me the garage apartment you were all so ashamed of. Maddie's mouth fell open. Ben's brow furrowed in disbelief. Mom, how did you manage that? Why didn't you tell us? Ben asked, his voice a mixture of shock and something that sounded suspiciously like fear. I met his gaze steadily. Because you never asked. The silence deepened as I explained how it had happened. I've been tutoring the grandson of the family who bought our house. 3 months ago, they mentioned they wanted to sell, but were concerned a new owner might tear it down to build something larger. I negotiated to keep it in my name, paying in installments with my pension and the income from my new position. I glanced at the photo album still clutched in my other hand. This album was meant to be my Christmas gift to you. I wanted to tell you tonight that our family home would remain in the family as a legacy of reunion. The revelation hit my children like a physical blow. They had underestimated me in every possible way. You've been hiding the house purchase from us. Maddie stammered, her voice higher than usual. Ben's response came through gritted teeth. So you don't need us anymore, is that it? Clara's fresh tears spilled over. I thought you weren't strong enough to stand up on your own. As these accusations hung in the air, the dining room door unexpectedly swung open. A tall man with a calm demeanor and salt and pepper hair stepped inside, his overcoat lightly dusted with snow. His presence commanded attention immediately. Everyone turned to look at the newcomer. I stood frozen in place, hardly believing my eyes. Edward Ned Kingsley. My voice was barely above a whisper. Ned smiled gently, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Hello, Helen. It's been a long time. The man removed his coat, revealing an impeccably tailored suit. He scanned the room before his eyes settled back on me with a warmth that stirred memories 4 decades old. Ned introduced himself to the bewildered crowd. Good evening, I'm Edward Kingsley, CEO of Kingsley Global Initiatives. We specialize in educational investment and development. He paused, his smile deepening as he looked at me. I'm also Helen's former fiancé from before she met the father of her children. Maddie's eyes widened in shock. Mom was engaged before Dad. I nodded slowly. There are many things I haven't told you. Not because I forgot, but because I didn't think anyone wanted to hear. Ned moved confidently through the room to stand beside me, his presence lending me a strength I didn't know I needed until that moment. Helen and I have been corresponding for the past 6 months, he explained to the stunned gathering. She shared with me her vision for an emotional learning system combining literature with psychological therapy for high school students. He turned to face my children directly. I've approved a $2 million investment to develop the program. Helen will be the majority shareholder, founder, and content director of this initiative. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. Even the economic journalist had stopped writing her pen, suspended in midair. Ben, always suspicious of others' motives, narrowed his eyes. And what conditions come with this investment? Ned's answer was simple and direct. None. I'm investing in Helen, in her intrinsic value, something her own children seem to have overlooked. He reached into his pocket and placed a small black velvet box on the table. Everyone assumed it contained a ring, and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Was this man proposing after all these years? Ned opened the box. Inside, glinting under the chandelier, light lay an antique brass key. This is what Helen left behind 40 years ago, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I'd like to return it to her now, the key to the lakeside house in Vermont. I held my breath. This key didn't just unlock a door, it unlocked a future I had once abandoned. The guests watched in stunned silence as Ned gently placed the key in my palm. My fingers closed around it, feeling its weight, its history, its possibility. The house has been maintained all these years, Ned said softly, for my ears only, waiting for you to come home. My children stared at us, their faces a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and dawning comprehension that the mother they had dismissed and hidden away had a life and a value they had never bothered to discover. What about our family home? Clara asked in a small voice. I looked at the deed in my hand, then at the key, then at my children. For the first time in decades, I had choices, real choices of my own making. That, I said quietly, will depend on what happens next. The brass key gleamed in my palm as Ned explained the significance of the lakeside house to the stunned room. This house was where Helen and I planned to live after our wedding. He said, his voice steady but touched with nostalgia. We designed it together, her study overlooking the water, the wraparound porch for morning coffee, the library with built-in shelves reaching the ceiling. He turned to me, his eyes gentle. After Helen chose to marry your father instead, I kept the house exactly as we planned it. I've never lived there myself. Ned's next words were directed at me alone, though everyone could hear them. I couldn't give you the life you dreamed of then, but at least you deserve to have it now if you want it. The implications of his offer hung in the air. My children reacted in ways that revealed everything about them. Maddie stepped forward, attempting to regain control of the situation. Mom, don't let emotions cloud your judgment. Her voice carried the same patronizing tone she'd used when explaining why I shouldn't keep my old cell phone. Ben's face flushed with anger. How can you trust him more than your own children? The irony of his question seemed lost on him. Clara, always the most sensitive, looked up with tears streaming down her face and whispered, Did you ever have dreams beyond being our mother? Her question struck deep. In all these years, not one of my children had ever asked about my life before them, or my dreams beyond them. Yes, I said softly then with increasing confidence. I did. I told them about the night classes I taught at Springford while they slept. I described the essays I'd written that were set aside because of diaper changes, cooking, and parent-teacher meetings. I revealed how I'd declined a doctoral scholarship because there was no one to watch my children. I don't regret raising you, I said, looking at each of my children in turn. I only regret that you never once asked what I gave up to do it. Ned stepped forward, his presence steady beside me. Your mother's curriculum designs have systemic value that educational theorists have been seeking for decades. Schools across 3 states are lining up to implement her program. He turned to face my children directly, and none of you knew that your mother has been working quietly every night, developing these ideas while living in a garage apartment with inadequate heating. The shame on their faces was palpable, but it no longer gave me satisfaction. I was beyond needing their remorse. Ned held out the key again. This house is yours, Helen, whether or not you accept anything else from me. It's not a proposal or a condition. His voice softened. I'm not giving you a home to keep you. I'm giving it because I want you to know that someone has always believed you were brilliant enough to choose your own path. As this extraordinary scene unfolded, I noticed a well-dressed woman leaning toward Stephen near the dining table. She whispered something, but in the charged silence her words carried. If she hasn't signed an exclusive contract yet, I want to purchase the curriculum rights immediately. Stephen smiled knowingly and whispered back, she hasn't chosen any side yet, but this time she's choosing for herself. I stood up straighter, a sense of certainty settling over me. For decades I had been the peacemaker, the compromiser, the one who gave way. That woman was gone. I'm not abandoning anyone. I announced to the room, my voice clear and unwavering. I'm only abandoning the practice of trading my freedom for an unhealthy attachment. I am no longer the woman you could control. I looked directly at my children. I am Helen Parker, and for the first time in 30 years I am truly living. I walked away from the table, the key clutched tightly in my hand. Its weight was reassuring, solid, real, full of possibility. Clara rushed forward, her steps unsteady, her voice trembling. Mom, are you going to leave us forever? I looked at my youngest daughter, her tear-streaked face, her eyes finally meeting mine without evasion, and answered truthfully, that depends on whether you want to know who your mother really is. Deep within me, I recognized a fundamental truth from this moment forward. The choice was mine. For the first time, the room remained silent as the implications of my words sank in. My children had always seen me as an extension of themselves, a supporting character in their stories. They had never considered that I might have my own. Ben broke the silence. This is ridiculous. Some stranger appears with a house key and suddenly you're ready to throw away your family. No, Ben, I replied calmly. A man I once loved has reminded me that I had worth before I became your mother, and I still have worth now. Maddie attempted a different approach. Mom, you're upset. We understand, but making impulsive decisions. There's nothing impulsive about reclaiming 30 years of silence. I interrupted. You've had my entire adult life. I'm asking if you're willing to know the woman who existed before you and who exists still. Ned stood quietly to the side, offering support without interference. This was my moment, my reckoning with my children. For decades, I continued, I've listened to your stories, celebrated your achievements, tended to your needs. Not once did any of you ask about my dreams, my work, my heart. Not even when I was living in a space smaller than your walk-in closets. The party guests had become silent witnesses to our family's unraveling and potential rebirth. Some had tears in their eyes, others nodded in understanding or recognition. Clara whispered. I didn't know you had dreams beyond us. That, I said gently, is precisely the problem. The room fell into a tense silence after my declaration. The brass key to the lakeside house felt warm in my palm, as if alive with possibility. Ned stood beside me, a quiet pillar of support, while Maddie, Ben, and Clara backed away slightly. They looked as though they were being forced to confront something they'd long denied, that their mother was an independent person they could no longer control. The transformation was palpable. The elegant party with its champagne towers and canapes had become the backdrop for something raw and real. A woman reclaiming her life in front of those who had tried to diminish it. Ben, always the most stubborn of my children, made one final attempt to regain control. He stepped forward, his voice low and accusatory. You're being manipulated, Mom. Can't you see that? This man shows up out of nowhere, hands you a key, promises money and opportunities, and you turn your back on your family. I met his gaze without flinching. You should be asking yourself why it took a stranger for me to be valued this way. The simplicity of my response left him wordless. Behind him, Maddie nervously smoothed her designer dress while Clara stared at the floor, her makeup in ruins. I addressed the entire room, my voice steady and clear. I'm not abandoning my children. I'm leaving the position they've confined me to as a shadow, a cash dispenser, a memory to be hidden away. I straightened my shoulders. I'm leaving so I can be myself without needing permission. Maddie, ever conscious of appearances, forced a bright smile as she turned to the remaining guests. Everyone, please continue with dinner. My mother is just a bit emotional tonight. We're a close family. Yes, I interrupted. We were a family until you decided I no longer fit your new image. Stephen Blackwood nodded slightly from across the room, a gesture of understanding and respect. I decided to share one final piece of my story, the quiet journey I'd undertaken without any of my children noticing. While living in Mrs. Collins' garage apartment, I budgeted carefully on my substitute teaching salary and the income from selling homemade pastries online with Mrs. Collins. I paused, watching recognition dawn on their faces. I relearned technology to write my integrated teaching program, and I proactively contacted Springford School after seeing their job posting on the local library bulletin board. The journalist was writing frantically now. Several of the guests were nodding in approval. You didn't know any of this because you never asked. You assumed I was just sitting around waiting for your occasional phone calls. I wasn't. I was rebuilding my life one step at a time. Ned leaned slightly toward me, his voice soft. Shall we go? I nodded. Before turning to leave, I looked at my 3 children one last time. I don't expect you to understand right away, but I hope you'll remember this is the first time I've chosen what's good for me. As I moved toward the door, Clara rushed forward, her steps unsteady. Mom, what about the old house? What are you going to do with it? I placed the envelope containing the deed back into my handbag. I'll need to think about that. It was once a home. Now I'm not sure you deserve it. The words hung in the air, not vindictive, but honest. Clara stepped back as if she'd been slapped, but for the first time that evening she didn't cry. Instead, she looked at me with dawning recognition, seeing perhaps for the first time the woman who had existed before she was born. Stephen approached and handed me his business card. 9 o'clock tomorrow, Helen. We have much to discuss. I nodded and slipped the card into my pocket alongside the brass key Ben called after me. This isn't over, Mom. I turned back, meeting his gaze calmly. You're right, Ben. It's just beginning. Guests parted to let Ned and me pass. As we reached the door, I heard whispers behind us. Some sympathetic, others shocked, but all attentive. The economic journalist was already on her phone, no doubt calling in the story. The cool night air felt refreshing against my skin as we stepped outside. Snow was still falling, coating everything in pure white, a blank canvas. "Are you all right?" Ned asked gently as we walked down the path. "I'm better than all right," I replied. "I'm free." And I walked away from Maddie's house not in silence, but in agency, for the first time. As we reached Ned's car, I looked back at the mansion on the hill, lights blazing from every window. For years, I had gazed at such houses from the outside, feeling small and forgotten. Now I understood that the true prison wasn't on the outside, but within, in the belief that I existed only in relation to my children's needs and wants. That prison's door was now open and I was walking through it. 3 months passed. Vermont's winter reluctantly gave way to spring, the snow melting to reveal tender shoots of green pushing through the damp earth. The world was renewing itself, and so was I. I settled into the lakeside house Ned had given me. The morning light spilled through the east-facing windows, dancing across the wooden floors, just as we had envisioned 40 years ago. The library's shelves now held books on educational theory, alongside my favorite classics. The study overlooking the water became my creative space, where I worked late into the evenings, no longer hidden away in a cold garage apartment. My position at Springford School flourished beyond expectation. I led the development team for our curriculum, Words of Change, which blended literature with emotional learning techniques. We'd just signed a major publishing contract that would bring the program to schools nationwide. Ned lived 15 minutes away in his own home. We saw each other several times a week for dinners, walks by the lake, or quiet evenings discussing books and ideas. We didn't live together. Both of us treasured our independence too much for that. What existed between us wasn't the breathless romance of our youth, but something more valuable: two adults choosing to walk alongside each other, supporting without controlling. After that Christmas night at Maddie's house, my children had each reached out in their own way. First came apologetic text messages, then tentative phone calls, and finally individual visits. I welcomed these overtures, but established clear conditions: they would participate in family therapy, engage in honest dialogue, and accept my new role. I was no longer the compliant mother who existed solely for their convenience. Today marked the first time since Christmas that all three of them, Maddie, Ben, and Clara, were visiting together. They arrived at the lakeside house carrying food, flowers, and a palpable awkwardness. As they entered, I saw the surprise in their eyes. They were seeing a different mother, confident, serene, a woman with her own life, who no longer emanated that desperate need to be needed. After lunch on the porch overlooking the still thawing lake, I brought out the envelope containing the deed to our old family home. I placed it on the table between us. "I've established a trust," I explained. "The house will belong to all four of us and can only be sold if we all agree. But there are conditions." My children exchanged glances as I outlined the terms. "We will have mandatory family gatherings once every quarter. All financial transactions involving family assets will be fully transparent. None of you may use my name for investment or business purposes without my written consent." Clara broke down first, her tears different from the manipulative sobs of Christmas night. "I turned you into a shadow of yourself," she whispered. Maddie's voice caught as she spoke. "I didn't know you could be this strong, or, rather, I didn't want to know." Ben, always the last to yield, finally said, "I was afraid to admit you didn't need us anymore, but I understand now we forced you to prove that." I looked at each of them in turn. Forgiveness isn't a gesture. It's a journey. I won't promise complete forgiveness today, but I am willing to walk that path with you if you accept that I am Helen Parker, not just your mother. They nodded, and for the first time there were no arguments, no defensiveness, no performances. Ned appeared from the kitchen carrying another small velvet box. My children tensed, assuming what was inside, but when he opened it, the box contained architectural plans. These are designs to convert your old family home into a community cultural space. He explained, a place for educational workshops, book groups, and an archive for your curriculum materials. He turned to me, his eyes gentle. If you'd like, we could transform it into a place that doesn't just preserve memories, but creates opportunities for the next generation. I smiled, reaching for his hand. My children watched this simple gesture of affection, evidence of a connection they'd never imagined their mother might have. They were no longer just takers, they were learning to give back. Later that evening, after they'd gone, I placed a new photograph on the bookshelf in my lakeside home, a portrait taken earlier that day, me standing between my 3 children and Ned alongside my educational colleagues. Behind us stood the old family house, soon to become a space for future growth. There are gifts that don't come from sacrifice but from truth. When I stood up for myself, I didn't lose my children. I gave them the chance to grow up, and I at last got the chance to live.